Mr. Docs, you're on the line.
Hello, hello.
All right, thanks so much for waiting. The call screener was telling us that your question is about how does the transition to an ANCAP society handle the existing property that's already there. So public. I assume you mean things like public parks and stuff like that.
Well, I guess in particular, how it accounts for common ownership institutions and what the property ethics within an ANCAP society, um, how it views these things, and how it would deal with them.
Sure. I suppose I should jump in and clarify. Um, Now, this is I won't necessarily give the argument right here, we get into that. This is an argument that I developed, and apparently, I found out that other people had already independently developed it. That you can't have group property, you can't have group ownership under the anarcho-capitalist legal theory, because we consider it to be a contradiction. So basically, the way we would deal with this is, tough luck for these people who have invested a lot of their energy. They've got based a lot of their investments and everything on the premise that there's such a thing as this concept of group property. Well, tough luck, your investments are going to go bad. We have to distribute this property to its actual legitimate single owner, whoever that might be. Now, you could do this in a number of ways. Maybe there'll be some libertarian Nuremberg trials at some point in the future, where we'll be able to point our fingers and chastise all the evil people who have made this happen. But it is a legal fiction, so we can't allow that, and that's like the fundamental point. It is just a legal fiction, so there might be some sort of a bust phase as people recognize this to be a legal fiction. Um, but as the Austrians will tell you, uh, pardon me, the bust isn't the bad part. The boom is the bad part. That's the part where we're all pretending that there are all these fiat goodies which don't actually exist. You got to get through that bust if you want to have proper flourishing.
Gotcha. Um, so I guess one thing to point out is that empirically there are groups of people that commonly deal with and manage large resources, right? This is something that we can directly observe. Are you then advocating for forced redistribution of the property that exists and is managed by large groups of people?
Well, I do want to clarify that I'm not against a group of people managing some property. I'm against multiple people owning some property. So in a lot of cases, this isn't going to be necessarily too difficult if Steve Jobs, if he was still around, well, he's going to own pretty much everything that Apple has. Obviously Wozniak will take his share. Um, but if people are trying to resist by force some property going to its legitimate individual owner, then take out your guns and start shooting them.
Okay, so that is kind of like an advocacy for forced redistribution. So if you were looking at, for example, um, you mentioned a difference between property and managing some land or resource, for example. What do you think that distinction would be if, for example, 100,000 people were managing and caring for an irrigation system? What would the difference between that be if they all have an equal say in said management of an irrigation system and all of those people owning said irrigation system?
Well, in one case, you would have to posit that each one of them could do what they want with that property, even if that contradicts what other people want to do with that property. That's a contradiction. But if people are just managing something, like, if I had like a farm and I had farmhands who worked on my farm, well, nobody would suggest that one of these farmhands is allowed to decide whatever crops he wants to grow there are going to grow there. Ultimately, I would be allowed to go, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to do what I want to do. And if you don't like it, well, I don't know, find a different job.
I see what you're saying. So you're actually talking about, for example, making decisions about said property. And that's what I mean by managing the property, just to be clear. So, like there's some economists that have done some empirical work on this, like Eleanor Ostrom, um, Nobel Prize winning economist, and she does work on common pool resources, and she kind of lays out how in these institutions what you have for the successful commons clearly defined resource boundaries of what people can and can't do with the resource, rules that are adapted to local conditions. The users themselves participate in the rulemaking. There's conflict resolution mechanisms that are baked in to how this resource is managed. And of course, there's monitoring of the resource. All of these things kind of play a role. So I'm not talking about something that's like open access. Instead, I'm talking about something with like a particular rule structure where the users collectively make the rules. Membership is defined. For example, if you were like misusing this irrigation system, there would be consequences, right? And those consequences are agreed upon by the people who use and manage the resource. So whatever hundreds of thousands of people in the irrigation system example.
Let me sort of chime in here just to see if I can assist with this. So I want to sort of elaborate on our position just very briefly here. Imagine that there's somebody who says that they have $1 million in their bank account. You'd agree with me that them saying so doesn't prove that they have $1 million in their bank account, right?
Sure, sure.
And so if somebody who says that they've got $1 million in the bank account, they say, hey, Docs, come with me. We're going to go to McDonald's. And then they buy you a burger, let's say, from McDonald's. And you guys sit down and eat. And they're like, oh, yeah, I got this, I got that. Having $1 million means something really specific. And whether or not you have $1 million actually, there's all kinds of things that you can do about that. You can describe yourself as having $1 million. Other people can treat you like you have $1 million. You can go to the bank and get a loan, hopefully for less than $1 million, and they'll treat you. You know what I mean? You'd have all kinds of real material consequences to this performance that you're doing. But whether or not you have $1 million is like a specific claim with specific attributes, and there are specific things that distinguish between whether that's a true statement or a false statement. So, for example, if I had $1 million, I'd be able to go to the bank, presumably, and see my balance as $1 million, or I'd be able to withdraw $1 million. Obviously, in real life, some banks might not let you withdraw $1 million all at once, but yeah, I think you get the idea. Like there has to be. So the real question is, where does this break down? With $1 million, you can't spend $1 million if you don't have it, right? With ownership, we're talking about something really specific. We're talking about a relationship between a person and something that is property. And so when you claim, so what we're saying specifically is that describing something as having more than one owner is a false statement. I think that's the correct, but that doesn't mean that people can't pretend like they both own something. They can't claim to both own something. So you'll hear all the time people say, well, me and my wife own this house. How can me and my wife both own this house if it's not true that we both own this house? And so that doesn't really work because of what I'm saying here about how there's all these kinds of things you can do that have to do with looking like it's true and have nothing to do with actually whether or not it's actually true. So what is that distinction in this case? The distinction is whether or not you're able to avoid conflict as a consequence of this ownership status. And I have every expectation that Zulu can jump in here and save me with maybe some clearer phrasing, but that's the core of what we're discussing with ownership. So whether or not, let's take aside for a moment the distinction between management and ownership. Ownership's just this relationship you have with the thing, and when you're the owner of something, your use of it can't be justifiably alienated from you. So that's what the test is. And so we ask, when you have something like a public park or whatever the shared property is that's described as being owned, is the person who owns that thing able to resolve all the conflicts that come up? And if you see, like with the example of the husband and the wife, if they come into a disagreement about what to do with the house that they both allegedly own, you will immediately at that moment, in the exact same way as if you go and try to withdraw the $1 million that you don't have, you'll exactly in that moment be faced with, oh, this is the actual consequential feature of the ownership that I'm claiming is true. And it's no longer the case, because if two people own the thing within the framework of that ownership, they won't be able to resolve the conflict. What will happen next is they'll say, well, there's a million things that they could do. They could draw straws, they could roll dice, they could come up with some sort of agreement ahead of time, like every second disagreement, you get to win automatically. But all of that is missing the point, because the fact that you have to appeal to some sort of external and separated decision-making process it establishes conclusively that the ownership that was claimed wasn't present, because the ownership is supposed to be doing that thing that you've now admitted to having to go somewhere else for. So I apologize for the long response, but I hope that that sort of clarifies the position a little.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. So you're talking about resolving conflicts. Now it is worth mentioning. So Eleanor Ostrom lays out these 8 design principles, and I mentioned a few of them. One of the things that I did mention in particular are conflict resolution mechanisms that do exist in these institutions of common ownership. So this isn't something that's not being accounted for. It would just be the case that if you're looking at 100,000 people who are managing an irrigation system, all of these people fundamentally agreed to these rules, and they all take part in enforcing said rules, and of course governing the resource themselves. So when you say if there's a conflict between more than one, a person, so if there's a conflict between the 2 people in the example that you gave, the inability to resolve the conflict would show some lack of ownership on one part or another.
If
I
if Zulu and I steal your microwave, and then we
Yeah.
agree with each other, Zulu and I say, look, neither of us is allowed to use the microwave for more than 2 minutes at a time, and we're not allowed to take it out of the house. We're clearly establishing some sort of conflict avoiding paradigm amongst ourselves over this thing that we have possession of. But it seems to me that that's not sufficient to demonstrate that ownership is taking place, only that there is possession. And again, I want to reemphasize one thing that's really tricky to get semantically, but I think it really is the core thing at dispute here. And I'm going to try to do this through metaphor, I guess. But the husband and the wife in the house, like I said before, they can. It's not our position that it's impossible to come up with a system like they're going to roll dice, they're going to wrestle, they'll pull a number out of a hat, they'll get a private rights enforcement agency to come in and arbitrate who's going to get to be the one to decide what color they paint the walls. After all, that's not our position, that that's impossible. Our position is that ownership as a concept is intended to fulfill that role, and the inability to complete that without going outside of the ownership is the indication that the claim of ownership is not a true statement. Zulu, I want to hand it back to you if I can there, because I worry that I'm monopolizing a little bit.
Yeah, no, don't worry, because I think you've got a good way of putting it, and it's distinct to my way of putting it normally. Now, it does strike me that you haven't really responded to the main criticism that Ask ANCAP was bringing up. Like, it doesn't matter if people have come in and they've agreed to these rules, right? Even if they stick with those rules for a very long time, there is some breaking point, and that breaking point is when there's a conflict. And it's like, well, suddenly we've got to appeal to all these random rules for how to deal with this conflict, but that was already supposed to be solved by the ownership. So we're engaged in this fiction completely detached from ownership, and because it's detached from ownership, there is no literal facts, legal facts that we can now appeal to. It's just, well, they all agreed to these rules, and what really binds them to those rules is no longer law. They're no longer bound to those rules by law. They're bound to those rules by their ongoing agreement. We've already postulated a position where somebody's no longer agreeing to the rules. They want to use this property for something incompatible with the other people, and they say, fuck the rules. That's what a conflict means. It is that people have no longer agreeing to the normal rules of how you would deal with something. If I've got the spear on the desert island, and somebody comes along and starts taking that from me, well, normally the rule would be you don't take other people's stuff, guy. But now they're no longer agreeing to that rule, and that's why you have a conflict there. So if you don't have the literal meaning of ownership upheld, well, then you're just describing whether people are currently playing nice or not, and like that's not really what law is there to do. It's not to describe if somebody's playing nice or not, and what they might do if they are playing nice. It's there to say, well, what happens when they don't play nice? What happens when we reach this breaking point and we find out we don't actually have $1 million in the bank? What then?
Gotcha. So I think there's some confusion here because I think we're doing a little bit of begging the question when you say this goes beyond like you're using some outside force for this notion of ownership, so it's not true ownership because ownership is defined in this particular way. What way are you defining it in particular? I know you mentioned the conflict resolution mechanism, but I mean, I felt like I addressed that. You were saying that's not a true conflict resolution mechanism because it has to look a particular way. What would that way be that going about resolving a conflict, has to be in order for it to be defined as true ownership?
So we get our theory of property from the non-aggression principle.
Right.
It's very important that we do this because this is actually rooted in some objective moral principle. We consider it to be a correct principle, the non-aggression principle. Um, so that produces a very specific sort of property theory. It can't just be, well, I want this to happen, because then you're just ignoring some facts of reality when you're doing that. When you're just making up that, oh, I now own the moon because I said so. Me and Sarah, we will own all of the continental United States together. Me and John, we will both own and not own that warship over there. Like you're just fantasizing. It's children playing property rights.
I see. So your understanding is that the non-aggression principle is somehow rooted in some like mind independent law of reality. Is that what you're understanding it to be?
Yeah, as in nobody just kind of randomly decided that this is the only way to have a non-contradictory set of property norms. That just is the case. This is the only one which doesn't allow for a contradiction.
Gotcha. What is that informed by? How do you inform that this is some objective thing that exists in reality? Because all of my knowledge of like anthropology, human societies, and actual human social organizations seems to inform me that that's not how people make decisions regarding property or ownership historically, even, right? Like, so how is this informed for you?
Well, see, that would be mind dependent there. That would be just what do people, kind of make up in history? What do they reckon are the property norms? But this isn't how we're rooting it. We're rooting it in this inductive approach. Pardon me. Where you look out and you see, hey, uh, there is this thing called a latecomer to some property, and the latecomer, it is not possible to justify his possession. Nobody could ever do it. The latecomer himself has to simultaneously assume that he shouldn't be allowed to possess it and that he should be allowed to possess it. He's in contradiction. He can't be right. So what are we left with? We're left with only the first comer. That is the fact of reality that we're pointing at with our property theory.
Gotcha. How do you so I guess that right there where you mentioned there's a contradiction because the latecomer has to assume that he both should and should not be able to own the property. How did you come to that? How did you inform yourself on that?
Sure. So this is an argument I get from Stefan Kinsella. The article's called. It's a very long title. It's something like "Thoughts on the Latecomer" and "Property Norms." It's something like that. Very long title. You'll find it if you just kind of slam those words into the Google machine. So basically, the argument is that if you have some property dispute between Crusoe and Friday over let's say a stick, Crusoe got to that stick first. He's the first comer, right? And then Friday he comes along and he tries to take that stick from Crusoe. The important thing to recognize in the first case is that both parties here must recognize ownership as distinct to possession. Why is that, right? Because if let's take Crusoe, he's got to think that ownership is distinct to possession because he's thinking, well, even if this asshole Friday takes this stick off me, I still own it. I am owed that stick. I want that stick still, right? Similarly, Friday must, because he's fighting for it, right? He must think that, well, even though Crusoe currently has possession of it, I deserve that stick. I'm going to take it from him. And even if Crusoe manages to take it back from me later on, it would still belong to me. So ownership and possession have to be distinct. But for the latecomer, Friday, he is simultaneously assuming that possession is sufficient to demonstrate ownership. That if he manages to take this stick off of Crusoe, then it's his, right? Or else he wouldn't be even trying to do it. If he thought that, no, it would still be Crusoe's, even if I take it, then what would be the point in taking it?
Gotcha. I guess this seems to be um assuming some particular things that aren't what I think I'm referring to, or what anyone is typically referring to when they mention common ownership. So I guess if we ground it in empirics, we can maybe see how this might apply to like the irrigation system example, right? If we have like an irrigation system that's owned, managed, controlled by 100,000 people, however you want to word it, uh, on what basis would you say that you would this like latecomer example would apply to this, right? Let's say another person's born tomorrow, and they grow up to like use this irrigation system, so now it's 100,001 people, right? How does this latecomer not have the same existing claim of ownership as everyone else? And what do you think the conflict is? Because in this case, we're not talking about possession, we're talking about using a common pool resource, right? Why do you think ownership can't apply to a common pool resource on that scale?
Well, because it's the same thing, right? If you do end up with a conflict where somebody wants to do one thing with it, which is mutually exclusive of what other people are trying to do with it, well,
Hmm.
then you have no way to resolve this without saying, well, actually, this guy who's trying to do this, he doesn't own it anymore, right? That's the argument, you know. Group of people A through Z, they each commonly own some stick. Now, A wants to do the spearfish, B doesn't want this to happen. Either option you pick, either you're going to pick that the spearfishing should indeed go forth, or you're going to pick that it shouldn't go forth. Either option contradicts the initial premise that both A and B owned it. Because if A owns it, then he should be allowed to use it for spearfishing. If B owns it, he should be allowed to prevent this from happening. Um, so either option you pick, if it does or doesn't happen, whatever your property theory revolves into, whatever crazy algorithm you've got to decide that, it's going to have a contradiction.
I see. So your understanding is that there's no way to resolve it. So I guess, and I'll kind of posit this again. What I'm talking about are kinds of systems with very particular rules regarding things like conflicts resolution mechanisms. So we can see this empirically, like, there's an irrigation system in Nepal that she writes about in her book, Eleanor Ostrom. And you see existence of graduated sanctions, of arbitration panels, right? So if there is violation of one of the agreed upon rules by one of the members that are using the common pool resource, well, then it goes to arbitration. Then there's some sanction, maybe like a fine, right? It could be restricting access to said resource. There could be a number of things. Sorry, one sec.
So I suppose I could jump in there because it strikes me that you're just describing some particular algorithm to spit out either A or B wins. But the point I'm getting at is it doesn't matter what algorithm you use, whether that includes arbitrators, whether that includes appealing to the Platonic forms. It doesn't matter what your algorithm is. Whatever it is, it's going to spit out either A should get it or B should get it, right? And either option contradicts the initial premise that both A and B should get it.
Well, yeah, but I guess it's not an A or B situation, right?
Well, it is.
So like
There's a
for example,
conflict.
well, if we're talking about like let's say 100,000 people, um, you know, they all get together, they like write a letter, agree upon the terms of how, this letter should be worded, what the consequences are going to be, right? Everyone agrees to this, and they say, hey, well, this person ended up violating uh the rules that we agreed upon, and so now there's going to be a fine for it. How would this be any different from, because in your world you believe in arbitration from third parties as well. In fact, there's no third party involved. They're all people with direct stake in the transaction, right? We're not even talking about externalities in this case. We're just talking about people that have a direct stake in the resource. How is that in some way like worse or less legitimate than the kind of ownership that you would experience in ANCAP world, where you might go to a private court, you'd have like some agency enforce things for you. Instead, the people themselves who collectively own this thing are enforcing whatever rules and making whatever rules they want regarding this irrigation system.
Well, I think I'm going to jump in here just to say that I think we're going to have to go to the end of the show shortly just because of how far over we are. But I want to give a really short attempt at answering your question. The answer is this. I think that this really invites longer another discussion, so I hope that we can continue this discussion with you another time. And I think that what's really critical to focus on here is what I said back at the beginning of the call, which is when we were using the example of the husband and the wife, and I was saying ownership is solely the mechanism that makes that distinction. It makes the distinction, between who goes forward with their action and who doesn't. And anything that is some sort of external process. So what do I mean external process? If appealing to your ownership status is insufficient, then the ownership status is not there, because that's what ownership status is supposed to do. That's what we're claiming. So the reason that I think this conversation really will benefit from coming apart and coming back together again at the next opportunity is that, and I'm certain that Zulu will agree with me here, you're putting forward external processes that you feel are very you're suggesting, I don't want to say you feel, you're putting forward alternative methods, and they're packaged with this sort of idea that they're very effective methods for one reason or another. And so what we're saying isn't that, well, that just can't, if you do that, they're going to catch on fire, or they're going to start killing each other, or the thing that's under dispute is going to spontaneously combust or disappear. That's not what we're saying. We're saying an ownership claim is a very specific claim, and that ownership claim implies one very specific thing. And if you have to appeal to something other than your ownership status to resolve this sort of conflict, then you are, in doing that, you are establishing that the ownership claim is false. And that's sort of, so all of this sort of energy that we've been doing and that we've been putting into exploring all the alternative methods really are missing the point, because because what we're trying to say is that the mere fact that they are processes and methods that are secondary to the person's ownership status is the problem, regardless of how much energy we put into the ownership, how much energy we put into validating those processes as efficient one way or the other. I want to give you the last word, Docs, but just keep it.
Yeah, I just want, I guess I just want to make sure I'm understanding. I heard you guys say this ownership status thing. There's like this one thing that defines ownership. And is it ownership status that defines ownership? Because that seems circular. I guess I didn't really get what the one thing is, unless it was something that I already addressed. But what is that one thing? And then this will be the end of it. But just what is that one thing that you're saying defines ownership? Could you just detail that kind of as specific as you can?
Yeah, I think so. Zulu and I are gonna. I think I can let Zulu sort of answer for his half too. We're gonna get to the same place from two different ways. So for me, it is a normative thing. It's sufficient for me to say, in a society, which is just a set of people, in a given society, we've all agreed to some sort of norm. And I'm going to argue, I don't have time for it here, but the Spark Notes is we would argue that has to look a certain way, because otherwise it's going to contradict itself. And that contradiction would look like this. It would look like, if you think that you should own something, meaning if you're the owner means that you should have control over it, then that's something that I think 99% of people would agree with. And I just take that as a brute fact, that if you own something, you should have control over it. And then I would say, well, you own your body, and you don't think people should be able to put you in a cage. So obviously, you also think, and again, I'm not saying this is objectively true. I'm just appealing to what I think most people would agree to, and that's where I'm going to differ from Zulu because he's making an argument from a more objective basis. But then what I'm saying is, well, then you also think that you should not be. Other people aren't justified in alienating you from access to this thing that you own. So there's really two attributes to ownership for most people that most people will agree to, just by virtue of having a body and not wanting other people to do whatever they want with that body. So those two features are, if you own the thing, you can use it, and your use of it can't be separated from that by other people. And if you have those two things, then if you are dealing with things that are scarce, then that means that your use of it implies that you're separating other people from it. If there's more than two people who own something, then they're allowed to use it, but at the same time, them being allowed to use it implies that they're allowed to alienate the other person from the use of it, and therefore there's a contradiction. It's a false statement to describe them both as having that relationship. Now, I don't want to go right into that. I just wanted you to feel that I was explaining myself. So that's a subjective way, and I could just say that definition of ownership, I'm not asserting that it's objectively true. I'm just saying that for the 99% of people who think that it's objectionable to put somebody in a cage, it would be true for them, provided that they have any interest in not contradicting themselves. And Zulu, again, would establish that a totally different way. And I think a totally valid way, too. I should point that out. So that's what we're talking about, this ownership status. So I don't want you to walk away from this conversation thinking that ownership status is circular, because we're not saying you own something if you own something. We're saying ownership is the relationship you have with something where you can't, to those who are observing ownership, you can't justify separating that person from that thing. And so that's not a circular definition. That is a, well, I don't think I need to say anything other than that's not circular. That is what it is. That's the function of it. And I'll let Zulu, I think I should let Zulu sort of give briefly his objective way of getting there. Because like I said, totally different from how I'm getting there. And give you the same answer, and then we'll call it there for now and hopefully pick up the conversation next time.
For sure. So I did go into this a little bit earlier, so I'll be brief. Basically, I think you can just observe, based on the facts of reality, that it is the case that you can't deprive somebody of something they've created without, so you can't take it from them without depriving them of it. So if I'm acting as this parasite, let's say AskANCAP here is producing all these great things that I want. He's farming all this food, and I just go around and I just start taking everything from him. Well, then I'm relying on him for survival at the same time that I'm trying to destroy him. So I'm destroying that upon which I rely. I think that is the fundamental, like, moral abhorrence which goes on with any form of aggression. It's destroying the thing that you need in the first place. I don't think it's possible to flourish that way. So I think you're just living in contradiction if you're engaged in that type of activity. I think contradictions are false, so I don't think you should operate on contradictory premises.
Okay. Yeah, we can definitely. I don't know if you guys are planning on doing this again, but I'm happy to pick it up some other time.
Every weekend, Saturday, 5 o'clock, Atlantic Standard Time. Super thanks for calling in. I love this topic, and I look forward to talking to it again. I'm going to just bump you out of the voice chat, and we'll wrap up the show. And as always, please feel free. I'm always available to talk in the rest of the server. So thanks again for calling in.
All right, thanks. Bye.